Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Optimizing Your Financial World. I'm your host, Ryan Ruff. We thank you so much for joining us for our first episode today. And in a few moments, I'll be joined really by the star of our show. That's Mr. Mark Wade, the president of Echelon Wealth Strategies and the Echelon Family Office. Mark brings over 4 decades worth of experience in the wealth management and financial management sector, advising wealthy families, business owners, and helping best prepare them for the decisions that lie ahead. But first, before I bring Mark on, I want to give you, our audience, our viewers, our listeners, an idea as to what you can really expect on this show moving forward. Ultimately, it's in the name, optimizing your financial world. You see, each episode, Mark and I are going to be unpacking a specific complex financial topic. But the thing is, we're going to be breaking this topic down into kind of bite-sized pieces, easy to understand, and ultimately stuff that you could maybe take out of this show and apply to your own financial world. You see, like I said, Mark's been working 4 decades within this sector, and just before we hopped on our session today, Mark said it's the only thing he's ever done. That's a ton of experience working with very prominent, wealthy individuals, and it's the age-old saying, more money, more problems. Yes, that is the case, but also it's not necessarily just more problems, it's more lessons that can be learned and ultimately applied to you and your financial world. So with that, I want to go ahead and bring Mark on. Hey, Mark, great to see you. Great to have you aboard here for the first episode.
Hey, Ryan, how are you? It's great to be here today. We're real excited to kick off our series.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long time coming. I know, we've been going through the process to get things in motion here, and boy, do we have a great topic to launch into today. And Mark, when I was sitting having my coffee this morning, I was thinking about how am I going to get this conversation started, and I kept coming back to one word: uncertainty. You see, if you want to talk about uncertainty, man, look at the last year between the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that did for personal, individuals, families, businesses as a whole. I mean, take your pick as to what that made you do personally. Then looks to the side of it, you got the 2020 presidential election. Obviously, each presidential election every 4 or 8 years, is going to, inject some uncertainty into the markets, into our personal decisions, into the way that we spend our money. And then ultimately here now with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, one of the most impressive medical innovations that we've seen in our lifetime. Now, people are starting to spend some of their money, get their money back into the market. So we're starting to see an influx. So Mark, let's ultimately start by talking about what can families do right now to protect their money and ultimately give them peace of mind about their finances moving forward.
Well, Ryan, you're right. The recent history has been absolutely tumultuous and so unpredictable. We've never experienced anything like we've experienced before in history. And so really, we have to know, and clients need to know, or at least what our clients tell us, is it's so important for them to know that they are running on the right track, that the plans that they made 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 years ago, even in some cases, when we first meet clients, that those are still appropriate for them today, that they will effectively and efficiently carry them into the future. And that's really the question. Do they have the right plan in place? Because, like we're fond of saying all the time, listen, having all the work done and having it done as well and as complete as possible and as current to your current situations are 2 different things.
Sure. And so, Mark, what is this process essentially called when you sit down and you're going through these questions with your clients?
Well, different people refer to it in different ways. Some people call it a review. Some people call it um, a second opinion. And then what our clients, many of whom are wealthy and extremely affluent business owners and families, have said to us that the stress test has been the most valuable tool that they've ever seen. That's where we take each individual element of a client's planning and test it against worst case scenarios and not so worst case scenarios.
Sure. And this sounds like obviously a very applicable strategy that you'd want to implement, knowing what we've just experienced in the last year with the COVID-19 pandemic. So ultimately, to me, Mark, it sounds like, yes, this is a really great thing to consider. It's something that the super affluent, super rich, those with a massive net worth are not just doing once, but they're doing it on a regular basis to constantly evaluate their portfolio. But let's talk about the why. Why exactly is this such a valuable process that affluent families should be considering right now, given everything that we've been experiencing?
Well, if you look at the stress test on the most popular element of a client's financial world, their portfolio, right? Many clients have a portfolio that they review occasionally. Some have a portfolio that they don't review at all. And in fact, the individual elements inside those portfolio each have their own risk level. So when we stress test just the portfolio portion, and I submit to you, there are many other things in your financial world you should stress test. But when we just look at the portfolio portion of a person's individual financial or business financial world, we then look at the individual elements and say, okay, the portfolio as a whole performs like this and has a relative risk level of X. However, when we look at the individual components, oftentimes there are securities or there are holdings in those portfolios that really are significantly more risky than they should be and could really risk the entire success of whatever goal that portfolio is designed to achieve.
Sure, sure. So it's an ongoing thing. It's something you want to actively be testing. That being said, Mark, when it comes to the stress testing process, could you share maybe kind of like the three main ways, if you will, that this process can be just kind of utilized and harvested as a whole? What are those main ways?
Sure. So so the three areas we think that are extremely important in a client's financial plan and their entire financial slash legal environment are, of course, investments, but then there is also taxes. There are also the estate planning implications, and there are also the insurance elements. Because at the end of the day, as we're fond of saying, it's not so much just what you earn or accumulate, it's how much of those earnings and growth and profit and assets that you get to keep at the end of the day, and that ultimately you pass on to your family. So we look at and stress test all those different elements to make sure that they're working together to provide the best result for you and your family.
Right, right. Ultimately, we want to make sure our wealth is precedes us. We want to make sure it's passed down so that our hard work can be shared with those that we love and that we care about, and they can fulfill their life's goals and missions and things that they want to do. I mean, ultimately,
Absolutely.
that's the end goal. But hey, Mark, let's get into maybe an example specifically, and this could be real, one that you've worked with a client or even hypothetical for that matter, of why someone may have been prompted to come see you for a stress test. Were they worried maybe about a particular issue?
Yeah, here's a live situation right now. We've had a client approach us and say, uh, or a current client who just recently became a client approached us and said, my former advisors had us set up with this IRA arrangement whereby we were able to stretch out the payments to our family that the beneficiaries would be receiving ultimately. And we understand that there's been some change in the tax law, and they were spot on because current tax law uh, dictates that those IRA assets have to be distributed over a certain period of time now. So it cannot be stretched over the life of the beneficiaries the way it used to be able to do. So given that, if the client had not addressed that one specific issue itself, we then went on and stress tested and showed the client, look, here's the worst case scenario. And the results were devastating. So having the redesign of just that one specific element of the client's plan is going to save this client and ultimately the beneficiary millions of dollars.
Wow, wow. So yeah, I was just going to ask you. So that kind of encompassed both of my questions in that they were worried about something in particular, and when they came to see you, you helped improve their financial situation. You helped them dodge a pitfall that was on their way. So that you actually answered both the next question before I even had a chance to do it. But yeah, that's the nice thing about this process, Mark, that I'm gathering is it sounds like it is a process that it's a robust. B, it's customizable because, hey, let's be honest, everybody's numbers aren't the same. Nobody's going to have a, exactly identical portfolio to each other. So it's a custom tailored plan, one that's ongoing, helps you actively test their situations against those worst case scenarios. It sounds like it's airtight. But my question now to you is, what are the keys? What are the keys to making sure that the stress testing process that is done well?
Well, okay, so everything begins with a discovery, a thorough
Hmm.
understanding. We have to be absolutely certain that we're familiar not only with your financial and legal circumstances, but we're familiar with what you're trying to accomplish for your family now and in the future. And listen, ultimately, many of our clients have philanthropic inclinations, and we want to make sure at the end of the day that we are able to repurpose as much tax dollars as we possibly can to benefit those causes that are most important to you and your family in the future. So, it all begins with discovery. Do we have a complete and thorough understanding not only of the mechanics and the workings of your current situation, but of what you want to happen moving forward in the future? And to do that, we need to understand your family. We need to understand the various different uh, idiosyncrasies, because let's face it, all families are different, right? So we need to be able to understand all the different idiosyncrasies of your individual family and how these assets are going to affect them moving forward in the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mark, because you see in this we're really shifting towards like consumer driven markets in so many different facets of our economy. But as a whole, you're seeing that in that consumer driven market idea, we're finding more and more industries are leaning towards addressing what we call the human element. So, Mark, it sounds like the human element is really a big deal within these stress testing conversations, because you need to understand the client's goals and aspirations, not only for their finances, of course, but what they want to do with their life. Maybe charitable causes that they're interested in, or the colleges that they may want to send their kids to, and what they hope for their kids one day. Obviously, these human element conversations are very important for this process. So, when you're going through the discovery meeting, that kickoff meeting to really start this stress testing process, what kind of questions are you asking them? What's launching this process within that?
Great question. So, look, our goal is to help every family create what their vision is of an amazing life of significance.
Mm,
And everybody has a different idea of what is amazing and or significant to them. And it all comes down to, what does a family care about? What are they concerned about? We try to address these things through a thorough and complete understanding. We have a dialogue. The dialogue is a million different things that we can talk about, but the client leads us to what's important to them. Yes, of course, we have to cover the appropriate mechanics and the appropriate components of those mechanics. So we talk about assets, we talk about legal work, we talk about their current tax arrangements, and we try to define for the client their current situation. And if they make no changes, where does that lead them? What are the ultimate results? And that and part of that is where that stress test comes in, right? Look,
mhm.
this is what happens under the worst case scenario. But then we get into those things that are important to the client that they care about inside. Obviously, parents and grandparents are going to care about their children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren. But what are the other things that they care about? What are the goals and aspirations of each individual? Do they want to start a business? Are we still in college? Do we want to go to graduate school? Do we want to become a doctor or an attorney? Uh, what philanthropic goals do they have? Who do they care about in the way of making a difference in their community, in their state, and of course, on a more broad basis than that? Are there special needs in the family? Oftentimes,
Mhm.
we have family situations where we have to provide for individual family members because of various challenges or disabilities they may have. So all of these things are part of the soup, if you will, that become part of the overall plan. And the stress test, again, to circle back to that, is really where we test the current situation, where we help to define new solutions
Mhm.
that work significantly more effective and efficiently for the client. And then, of course, too, oftentimes we have to replace certain portions of their current plan uh, to make sure that the probability of achieving their goals
Mhm.
increases dramatically.
Sure, it's you want to shore up the ship. You want to make sure there aren't any leaks in the foundation. I totally understand that. And Mark,
Absolutely.
specifically when it comes to some of those conversations, those are obviously deep internal conversations within a family. In some instances, I'm sure you may even run into a discovery process where you're sitting down with a family and they're talking about these deep emotional issues or challenges that they face that obviously play a role in their finances moving forward. That's a unique conversation and also a unique connection that you as a wealth manager need to have with that family, that individual or business owner across the table. One of the big things that we talk about with the stress testing process overall, Mark, is the fact that the super rich, the super affluent individuals, well, they obviously have a tremendous level of access to the top professionals, that have all the financial acumen to be able to help them allocate their dollars and cents properly. But it sounds like there is a very big importance on that human element and being able to have some of those emotional and tough conversations with the client. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking to that, this is a multidisciplinary process.
Mhm.
There's us, the wealth management firm, and in some cases our family office. We're there to shepherd and coordinate all the different disciplines, the attorneys, the accountants. Of course, we provide wealth management services, the insurance services, all of the different financial planning sub-disciplines, and to be able to coordinate those things on the client's behalf, it's a large task, and we do so, and this is where our industry is headed now. Not so much only because of COVID, because this has been an initiative of ours for quite some time, but to be able to bring those players to bear at the right points and times on behalf of the client to help address different issues as they pop up. That's really the team aspect of working with a wealth management firm and or family office.
Right, right. And Mark, the name of our show here is Optimizing Your Financial World. We want to obviously have conversations that our listeners and our viewers can take lessons learned and apply them potentially to their own portfolio. Obviously, the average Joe that might be watching this show is sitting back thinking, "Whoa, I don't have a net worth of $500 million. How am I going to gain anything for this?" Well, let's dive into that specific question. Could you
Sure.
share maybe a lesson or two that can be ultimately learned to somebody who may not have that level of wealth when it comes to stress testing overall? Basically, I'm asking you, does stress testing still apply to everyone, not just the super affluent?
Yeah, it absolutely does, because I mean, let me give you an example. So
Sure.
even an entrepreneur who is maybe early in his entrepreneurial career and has just started his business, or quite possibly has been in business for a couple of years, and maybe there's a partner involved, or maybe there isn't, right? But there may be key employees, and nowadays a lot of these employees are virtual. How do you deal with them? How do you address these situations? Because let's face it, most entrepreneurs, the majority of their wealth are in their businesses. I mean, you've seen this so often. Even the business owners who have been in business for quite some time, we often see that the majority of their financial net worth are tied up in their businesses. And so, how can the new entrepreneur and how can the established entrepreneur, how do they coordinate their personal and business, financial and legal affairs in such a manner that it drives the most value to the bottom line for them and their families?
Hmm.
That's really an important thing, and that just it helps us to address so many different aspects. What things should be covered in the business, what things should be covered in the personal financial planning elements. It's the coordination of those two things, and then you add in, of course, the goals and desires of those things that we're trying to accomplish.
Sure. It's a multifaceted approach, honestly, all the way
Multifaceted,
around. There's just so many.
multidisciplinary really is. Yeah,
Sure.
multidisciplinary really is the way to look at it.
Gotcha. I mean, there's so many things to consider on all fronts. It's not just the dollars and cents on the spreadsheet. At the end of the day, there are emotions, there are, family sometimes involved. There's so many other things to consider these days, especially like we had talked about at the top of the show, given areas of uncertainty in our life, like the COVID-19 pandemic. We don't prepare for them. We don't know that they're coming for us, but it helps to be shored up. It helps to make sure our boat doesn't have any leaks in it before we enter a time like that of uncertainty. So, Mark, to kind of bring our conversation today to a bit of a head, uh, you know,
Yeah.
let's say a client comes in, they sit down with you, they're going through the discovery process with you. It's that first meeting, you're launching into that discovery process. What are they leaving with? What kind of analysis or assessment or sense of satisfaction, rather, are they leaving with at the end of the day? Walk me through what you as president of your company hope that they walk out with.
Well, I can tell you what almost everybody says,
Hmm.
and it's we can predict it. Oftentimes they say, "Wow, nobody has ever sat down with us and asked us this variety of questions about the various different things that we talked about. And we never thought about the coordination of the various different aspects of our life." Sure, our accountant handles our taxes for us, and our lawyers drafted our wills and durable power of attorney years ago. And we got another guy that handles our real estate holdings for us. But nobody ever sits down and tries to coordinate it all in one place for us. And to be able to consolidate this in such a manner, oftentimes we're able to graph it and diagram it for them in a flow chart or a mind map in such a way that they've never seen it before. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and they go, I get it. That's
Right.
what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. I can only imagine it's probably a moment of enlightening or enlightenment rather for them for sure. And Mark, I'm glad you brought that up because that is definitely a conversation that we want to tackle in future episodes. Is that idea of cohesion across, the family attorney, the family accountant? That's a really big important process of this as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. We'll table that for a later episode for sure. But it certainly does play a role in the stress testing process overall. But Mark, before we say goodbye, any final thoughts, any final words regarding stress testing as a whole for our audience?
Yeah. So here's what, again, we're fond of saying it's not so much how much you earn or how many assets you create. At the end of the day, it's really what you get to keep. From a tax standpoint, we try to minimize the tax burden. And from a risk standpoint, asset protection is so important. We're also certified asset protection planners. And as such, we look at all the various different elements. Risk is not just risk of portfolio dropping in value, but it's also risk of litigious events in your life. How do you protect yourself from these litigious events? How do we protect ourselves from the taxes? How do we protect ourselves to make sure that our assets at the end of the day are going to do what we want them to do and are going to go to the people that we want them to go to?
Sure. It makes complete sense. And Mark, so I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me, chatting about stress testing, because I know it's such a robust system and there's a lot to unpack within it. So I'm sure it's going to come back up in future conversations that we're going to have. So I'm glad we got to lay the foundation here in our inaugural episode. But yeah, thanks for sharing some of that 4 decades worth of experience with us today.
Hey, Ryan, thanks so much. I look forward to future episodes. Have a great day.
Alrighty. And hey, we want to thank you, our audience, for spending time with us here on this inaugural episode. If you liked what you saw, you liked what you heard, feel free to like, comment, share, of course, subscribe, share this knowledge with some of your friends, your family, and hopefully some of this information will help in turn to optimize your personal financial world. So for Mark Wade, I'm Ryan Ruff saying so long. We thank you so much for joining us for today's episode, and we'll see you on the next episode of Optimize Your Financial World.